to go out of our own personal exile, our own personal galus. And this is a process which happens on Pesach and in the days leading up to Pesach. It's also every Yom Tov has certain energies with it, certain inspirations from above. And when these Yom Tovim happen, they give us special strengths. And the strength of Pesach is the ability to become free people. Today we're going to look at 3 names of the Yom Tov, 3 names of the holiday, explore that, going out of our internal slavery and becoming free people. The name of the Yom Tov that refers to this is Chag HaMatzos. Why don't we call it by the biblical name of Chag HaMatzos? That's the name of the Yom Tov. Call it the Yom Tov of Matzah. There's a second name. In addition to Chag HaMatzos, we have a name called Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom. This is a name which you understood that when you want to ask the King of all kings for something, there's a process of how it's done. For example, you begin by mentioning Avram Avinu. You mention Yitzchak, our ancestors. You ask for other people. There's a process of how you daven. But once the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash happened and people are getting dispersed all over the world, it's becoming less and less common for people to have the sensitivity, the education, the know-how of how to daven. They came to a chassid, to a rebbe, I think it was the Chayza of Lublin, and he came to ask him for some help for Pesach, monetary help. And he sits down in front of him and he explains to him where he comes from and what his needs are. And the Rebbe hears him, and then the Chayza takes out of his drawer some money and he gives it to him and wishes him well. The Jew looks at the money and he wanted more. So he looks at the Rebbe and he says, listen, your grandfather and my grandfather come from the same town and they're really related. And he starts to explain to him the whole family tree. And it turns out that we're actually 4th cousins. So we're related. Relatives should help each other a little bit more than what you gave me. So the Chayza looked at him and he said, it's distant relatives. Fine. They come to Shul, and the Chayza was the Chazan. And by Chazar's Hashatz, when he's saying over the Shemina Esrei, the part that the Chazan says out loud, he starts to say, Elikei Avraham, Elikei Yitzchak. And he's talking about our ancestors. And this fellow is in the back of the shul, he screams out, distant relatives. Part of the davening is that we talk about our ancestors, we talk about their greatness, we talk about how much they, so to speak, were dedicated to Hashem, and we ask Hashem to help us answer our prayers. But Chazal understood, our sages recognized that people are not exactly going to know how to daven, so they gave us a text. In that text, when it comes to Pesach, what do we call this Yom Tov? We don't call it Chag HaMatzos like the Chumash calls it, like it says in the Torah. Rather, we call it Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom. We have a third name for the holiday, and that's what we all call it, is Pesach. That's the term that our sages use in Jewish law, in Talmudic literature. Pesach is the Gemara, of course, the Talmud volume Psachim, Mishnayos Psachim. It's all about the holiday of Pesach is referred to as Pesach, which means skipped over. And that talks about the fact that when Hashem took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim that night, he slayed the firstborn of the Egyptians. But every single Jewish home, no one died in those homes. Hashem skipped over the Jewish homes and didn't punish or hurt any of the Jewish people. These are the 3 names. There are other names. Aviv, Chag Aviv, it's the holiday of the spring. There are actually total 5 names, but I want to talk about these 3 main names today. Beautiful explanation. He says, why does Hashem call it Chag HaMatzos and we call it Pesach? He says when 2 people have a relationship with each other, each one talks about what the other person does for them. In other words, how lucky I am that person is in my life because that person is A, B, and C, or they do A, B, and C, or I'm so lucky that I have them. And the other person says, they're so lucky to have you, right? If you're in a relationship and you're talking about how lucky your friend is to have you as a friend, it's a little bit of a problem. The Yidden are celebrating Pesach. What do we say? We're so lucky that Hashem helped us. On the night of going out of Mitzrayim, he skipped over our homes. And he didn't hurt any one of the Jewish people, even though that maybe in many ways we were like the Egyptians. We worshipped idols. We were quite steeped in their culture. There were things which perhaps we weren't so perfect. And yet Hashem skipped over our homes and didn't kill even one of the Jewish people. So we're celebrating the greatness or the miracle that Hashem did for us. Hashem is talking about the Yontif. He says this is the holiday of matzah. Why is it the holiday of matzah? Because look what kind of Yidden I have. I tell the Yidden, go out of Mitzrayim. They don't know where they're going to live, what they're going to eat, where are they going to provide for their families. Nothing. Matzah, because they didn't even have time to make proper food for the way. They couldn't even plan this, to have an idea of how they're going to survive. They just went. And the dough that they took with turned into matzah. So Hashem says, this is the holiday that I'm celebrating the connection that the Jewish people have with me, their deep faith, their trust, their belief in Hashem, that if I said to go, it's going to be good. So again, we're calling it Pesach because we're thanking Hashem for skipping over our homes and not killing us when he did it to the Egyptian firstborns. And Hashem is calling it matzah, praising us that we're so dedicated that we have done. We went out into Mitzrayim, into the desert, without any plan, without knowing where we're going. Of course, you'll say slavery. Who wants to be a slave? It's true, nobody wants to be a slave, but at least you know where you're going to sleep, and you know where you're going to eat, and you know what's going to be. You don't go into a desert. People don't survive in a desert for a very long time, especially in these numbers of people. That is a. But let's look a little bit about what Pesach really represents. Pesach, the prophet Yechezkel says, is Leidas Am Yisrael. It's the birth of the Jewish people. And the reason why it's called the birth of the Jewish people is not because it's the beginning. Now we're not slaves, we're starting a nation. You can say that about any new existence. It's not a change that there were people and now we're a nation. We're a different entity. Any time that there's a birth, whether it's practically or it's figuratively speaking, there has to be three stages, three aspects to this birth. And if we look at the process of birth, we could understand how when we went out of Mitzrayim, we also had these three stages. And if we want to bring into our own lives freedom, we also go through these stages. And in a talk when the Rebbe spoke about this on Pesach, the Rebbe brought the example, which is often brought in Hasidic philosophy, and that's the example of a teacher and a student. If you want to understand the process of birth, now we're not talking about information that the student didn't know yet. It's something new. We're talking more than that. It's something completely different than what the person was even able to relate to before. It's like the Jewish people getting the Torah. It's not just that we didn't have it till now we have it. We're having a connection to something which is very divine. It's a relation to a concept, to an idea, which is well beyond what we could understand with our own understanding. It's completely. Very often, when someone's trying to explain to you a concept or a new idea, you realize I have to put aside everything I knew till now and be willing to accept this new idea. Because if I'm stuck with my prior knowledge or my earlier level of understanding, it doesn't allow this new idea to penetrate. It doesn't allow this new idea to come in. To move from Babylonia to Yerushalayim and learn the Jerusalem Talmud, the Gemara tells us that he fasted 100 fasts. Why did he fast 100 fasts? Because he needed to forget everything that he learned in the Talmud Bavli, in the Babylonian way of learning, in order to be open to learn the Bavli way of learning. It would hinder his understanding. I'm sure he learned, but he fasted to forget that part of Torah. It's a good point. He definitely learned. They learned other parts of Torah. So Rav Zera fasted to forget. Why? Because a person who wants to understand a deeper knowledge or a totally different way of understanding, he needs to lose, if you will, his prior way. He has to have what's called, in words of Chassidus, it's called bittul, self-abnegation. A person puts himself aside his own preconceived notions, and he opens himself up to understand something else. A person is in a situation, they have a certain challenge, a difficulty in their life. If they're not going to be willing to take some criticism, to understand that maybe they made a mistake, maybe something here should be looked at in a different way, they'll never get out of it. Sometimes when they hit rock bottom, that's when they say, oh, I should really change my perspective. But up until that point, if they're so strong, I'm right, I know what I'm doing, this is the right way, everyone else is wrong, it's very hard to reach that change, that shift. But there comes a point, and this is really stage one in becoming free, is when you realize, hey, maybe it's not all about me. Let me be a little bit vulnerable. Maybe there's something more to this that I could understand. And that's expressed by this first name of the Yontif called Chag HaMatzos. Because matzah, as we explained many times in these classes, is the idea of unlike bread, matzah is very thin. It doesn't rise. It's only flour and water. It's simple. It's slaves' food because it's cheap and it lasts a long. Ability is step one, both for the Jewish people to get out of Mitzrayim in the first place, and for us in our own lives to get out of our internal boundaries and limitations. Having that vulnerability that is 100% correct. I'm open. That is step one. But then there's a second step. If this student is going to be completely self-abnegated and be so humble the whole time and not try to say, I think I have the ability to understand what my teacher is going to tell me. I think I have the ability to try to connect and get it. Then I'll never understand anything, right? So the step two after the bittul, step two after this humility and realization left for the Torah, I'm going to take out the red one, the red Reta. We'll return to this programming in a minute. It's not fully closed. So as the halacha is, when a Torah is taken out, you stand up out of honor and you stay standing until you can't see the Torah anymore. So step two, after having that humility and you're focused and you feel that you could try to understand, and you have the second name of the Yontif, which is Man Chirusenu, freedom. What's the idea of freedom? Or what's the idea of feeling like a king or royalty? Is that you recognize, he's teaching me something new. I think I could understand what my teacher is telling me. That's not exactly humility. That's appreciating your abilities, your qualities, your gifts and talents, that you could say, I am going to understand what the teacher is telling me, or this new concept or this new idea. And that's expressed by chirusenu, by having that freedom, if you will. That's not enough. When a person is with humility, and then he has that freedom and he feels he's going to understand and try to appreciate this new teaching that's being told to him, then you have a third level. And that's Pesach. It's a complete leap. It's a jump. You actually could reach a level where you could understand what the teacher is really saying. You get what's in his mind, not a diluted version. So in personal freedom, what that means is you go to a completely different level than you were before. You graduate from your old way of thinking, even from a student level, and you now get what it is that your Rav, what your teacher is telling you. Okay, so these are the three names and the three steps. Why are you referring to a student and That's the example of student and teacher is very often the way Chassidus uses the process to explain this concept. I'll give you another example. When you have a seed, in order for a seed to grow, the seed first has to rot. Why does it have to rot? First, it rots and it becomes nothing. Then it starts to grow into a new entity. And then it's completely its own thing. You can't even see where the seed, that it was once a seed. There's three stages. There's humility, there's this freedom development, and then there's Pesach where you jump over, you pass over. It's a whole complete new different stage. People ask the question, what's this concept of freedom? Yes, we're not slaves anymore for F.R.E.E., but we're not exactly free people. You went from being slaves for F.R.E.E., being dedicated to Hashem, right? Now you got to do what Hashem says. And it comes with a lot of rules and regulations, right, which tend to be somewhat, we'll call it restrictive. What people don't realize necessarily is that it's not just it's restrictive. It's not restrictive. It's like going to a dietitian who's telling you that if you, Rashi brought this example the other day about a doctor which says, don't do what someone else did because you may get sick. He's not restricting you. He's helping you to be better. He's telling you that if you're not going to eat these and these foods, or you're not going to do this and this activity, it's going to be better for you. You'll be more free. Imagine you're playing on a rooftop, you're playing a sport, and everyone's scared not to fall off the roof. And they put a fence around, and everyone's free to run around. Why? Because you're contained. That fence helps you. Freedom is not expressed by the fact that there's no rules and no discipline. Freedom is the ability to express yourself and be who you are, and some to be able to get to that level, if you will. There's an interesting question. We're talking about step one being the idea of bittul, humility, self-abnegation, put yourself aside. It's a problem because the Talmud, the Gemara tells us that sages, the Tanya brings it as well, Rabbah, before he would teach, he would say a joke. He would say something funny. And the students would chuckle or giggle or laugh, and then he would start to learn. And the reason is because it opens the mind a little bit. It allows a person to, you just came from outside, who knows what else is going on, how your morning was. Then you come inside and you start to learn. There's a certain transition that takes place. And saying something humorous, it helps. That's not exactly bittul. It's not exactly humility. It's not exactly having that dedication and readiness and put yourself aside. The Rebbe answers this and he says that it's not part of the learning. It's the prep before the actual learning takes place. So first, the person has the gets there, which could be through it's called a milsam b'dichasa, something which is funny or light. But once you start the learning process, you always have to go through those three stages of humility, we'll call it vulnerability. Then a person is focused and he feels free and he's trying to understand. And then when he finally does understand, he goes onto a whole new leap, a whole new level. It's important to recognize that humility, or what sometimes referred to as a broken vessel, is only good for stage one. Even in a relationship, you can't have that, oh, I made a mistake, whoops, I'm vulnerable, I'm stuck, my bad. You could have that at the beginning, at one stage, when you're trying to fix it or grow. But as you're developing, you have to be a complete keli. You have to have that sense of freedom, that sense of being who you are, that sense of contributing to the relationship, that sense of putting in your mind and effort to try to understand. Our concept is not to break. It's not to destroy. Let's not confuse humility with brokenness or ruining things or destruction. So much so, we don't focus on breaking. Somebody once gave a gift to the Alter Rebbe. The gift was a snuff tobacco, snuffing tobacco, a case, a silver case that you keep tobacco in there. And apparently he didn't use it or he didn't need it or whatever it may be. And he used the cover as a mirror to see his tefillin. You know, when you put on tefillin, the tefillin are supposed to be between your eyes, on your forehead, but in the position between your eyes. So it goes, you have to look in a mirror to see, or you go like this, but you bring this story to the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, and he said that someone gave this to the Alter Rebbe, and he broke off the cover, and he used it for a mirror. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, no. He doesn't. I'm sure he didn't break the cover. You don't break things. Probably either it wasn't attached, or it was attached maybe with a string or something. It's something, I'm sure it wasn't, he didn't break it off, because he doesn't break things. We talk about humility. It doesn't mean break yourself. It doesn't mean to be feeling very down about yourself. It means a person is vulnerable to understand that there's something greater than themselves, which they're going to try to understand, which they're going to try to achieve, and so on. But once we did this, we were able to reach a level where now we could serve Hashem at a totally different, transcendent stage from before. Up until that point, yes, we're Jewish people. We're in Mitzrayim, or we just got out of Mitzrayim, and we're going to connect on some level. To reach a opportunity to receive the Torah, that you have to reach an entirely new level. Whether it's like the seed that rots, which has that humility, or it's the the student, which before the teacher, he understands that anything he knew till now, he's going to put it aside and try to understand the new concept. So in summary, before we go on, the three names of Pesach, which are Chag HaMatzos, the holiday of Matzah, represents humility. A person recognizes to become free, to be able to change, to be able to grow, he has to have that certain level of vulnerability, that certain level of humbleness. Step 2 is Man Chiruseinu. He realizes I have to be free. I have to contribute my talents, my capabilities, what I know. And thirdly is Pesach. That's when you have that leap to a whole new level. That's when you have that receiving the Torah, that stage where you connect Hashem on a completely new level. We have to recognize that when the Jewish people were in the desert, they were in the 49 levels of impurity. There are 49, they're really 50, but if you hit 50, it's really, really hard to get out. There's 49 levels of impurity. And we're living in Egypt for 210 years. And Mitzrayim, Egypt, was from the lowest levels. Morally, it was the most immoral place at the time. And the Jewish people were living there. And although we didn't, we kept our identity and we remained strong of who we are as a people, we kept our language, our names, our way of dress, but nonetheless, there's a spiritual impact. And we slowly were slipping and slipping. By the time the Jewish people were in the generation that was going to leave Mitzrayim, we were not in the greatest of places spiritually. We were quite impure. Going out of Mitzrayim, we needed this quantum leap to go from stage 49 of impurity all the way to receive the Torah. That's a major change. It's not just get a little better, be prepared to receive the Torah. The way that you could have that jump, that passing over, that Pesach, has to have that stage before, that matzah level, which expressed itself when the Jewish people said, Hashem said, go, I'm going. Hashem said, we have to go to receive the Torah, I'm here. When a person does that, that means I have that readiness to change. I'm open. I have that bittul. That's perhaps the most important key here in the first part, is to have that humility, that bittul. So as we prepare for Pesach, as we shop and clean and plan, we should remember that there's also a spiritual side to Pesach. And we should focus on that and not lose the opportunity that these days really bring us to go through those stages of humility, of freedom, and of that leap, that jump, that skipping over to a greater level and a totally new connection and relationship with Hashem. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for your